Okay, Adriaan. Um, I'd like to start with a question. Um, I had the opportunity in those 2 months to see your works, your jobs. Um, you're a whole person in a sense that you're doing multiple things with one aim, maybe following one aim, which is nature conservation. Um, but you have multiple. There are multiple aspects in your life. And how would you define yourself?
Phew. It's a,
It's
it's a complex
Yeah.
it's a complex question, but it's, I guess, a very simple question as well. I think, first of all, I've learned to stay close to my passion, which is taking care of the space that I can influence. Um, in other words, conservation, whatever I'm doing, I always have that in mind. And yes, are we right on the dot with it? No, there's still a lot of shortcomings. But farming cattle, extensive natural pasture type setup environment is a way of doing it. So I apply savanna ecology principles as far as possible within the realities of where we are currently in the world, or in South Africa. I farm with the predator, not against the predator. I have a rapid rotation through pastures, which at the end of the day is a net carbon sequestration that's taking place. So it's in that sense beneficial, not only to me financially, but to the landscape, to the environment, and at the end of the day, to everybody else around us. Still far from perfect. Still a lot of work to do there, but it's a lot better than what it was. Is it measurable? Yes, I guess. Am I measuring it? No. But I need to start measuring. Simple process is soil analysis and see how much carbon is actually trapped over time. So yes, that's part of it. I don't like high fences. I understand the need for it. I understand the importance of it for certain people and certain sectors within the conservation and farming industry. But I prefer to have free roaming wildlife coming through the landscape instead of claiming that it's mine. And yes, because of our legislation, you can actually own wildlife. You can buy them, you can sell them, you can keep them. I prefer if they can just move through the landscape, go where they want. Because in that there's a bigger picture, there's a bigger importance around genetics and things like that. So yes, that's one side of it. As a conservationist, tracking is also part of it. Being involved with wildlife tracking, training, evaluation of trackers is another big component of it. And because wherever I'm busy with it, it allows me to plant the seed of conservation. Then the other component to it is the soil microbes, which is allowing farmers, commercial crop farmers, to grow crops with less fertilizer, less pesticide, again through carbon sequestration. Because at the end of the day, it's the soil life and the carbon in the soil that allows us to grow. And we've been systematically replacing that with chemicals. But it's reached a point where many farmers have imploded.
The soil exploited.
The soil is dead. Can it be fixed? Absolutely, without a doubt. Can it be fixed quick? Yes, without a doubt. So it's more about the mindset of the custodian of the land at the time. And I think that's another, just a component that I might touch on, is I've learned that we are not owners of land. We are custodians of land. So with that title deed comes a huge responsibility to take care of land. And it doesn't matter what model, where in the world you are on. Private ownership, government ownership, it doesn't matter what it is. We all have a responsibility towards that as custodian, far more than anything else. And in South Africa, we refer to a group of farmers, crop producers mainly, who are mega farmers. It's claimed by the politicians that 80% of the food is produced by 20% of the farmers. Meaning that, or referring to those 20% as the mega farmers. The political agenda behind it, why it is well publicized, is big. There's a lot of context added in terms of a political agenda. On the one end, it is to say the rest of you, the other 80% of you, only produce 20% of the food, so we can do without you. And it's all part of the play around grabbing land without compensation. But the other part of the story, which is not necessarily told, is, and I visited a mega farmer a few days ago who wanted to speak to me about soil microbes because he's with his back against the wall with the chemical farming, the commercial protocols that's available. Is that he's a mega farmer. He's got a massive turnover in terms of money, but it's not easy. It's all financed, and it's millions and millions and millions of rands, but it all belongs to the banks and the co-ops. It's not easy.
Yeah.
So whatever comes off the field at the end of the season is first servicing debt. And of the millions that he's turning, there's not even that little bit that's easy. It's all just going straight back into the pockets of the financiers. So it's a big challenge for a lot of farmers. But the big aim is they need to be taking they need to take a change or approaching a change in approach to how they think about things. And that's where the biggest challenge comes, because there's a lot of money invested by other people into those processes.
Which are influencing as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Farmers, pesticide companies, fertilizer companies, financial institutions, they all thrive on this sad state that the world is in terms of using fertilizer. So big challenges, big things to try and change people's minds about it. And then if there's 50 farmers attending the information session at a farmer's day, only 5 will ask sort of sensible questions about it. The other 45 will whatever and don't change their attitude. Of the 5 who ask questions, only 3 will use this technology. 1 will not do it correctly and then blame the product. Well, it's not a product, it's just savanna microbes, soil microbes. And in that, he's going to blame the product because he didn't listen. The second one will do it correctly and he'll have the results, he'll see the results, but he's not going to believe his own eyes, number 1. And he's going to be talked into being scared again by the fertilizer guys and his neighbors and everybody else. So 1 in 50 who actually listen to the story will apply it correctly, use it correctly, have the results, and then believe his own eyes. Believe the results. And then start working more and more and more and more to streamline it and incorporate it into his farming processes. So it's just how it is.
Yeah, it's a slow process, right?
Yeah.
Just like planting seeds one at a time, like with tracking.
Yeah.
And
But now I haven't really answered your question. Because it's difficult.
He doesn't know. No, you answered in a way. Well, I would just like to reconnect a little bit with the first part. Well, to all the discussion. I think everything is on one direction, as you said, on conservation. And you told me how your cattle farming is beneficial to the environment. So the moving between camps, having different camps, and moving cattle between them, not leaving the cattle overgrazing an area. So deploying the soil from their properties is one of the aspects. But then there's an experience I participated with, which is fire. And can you explain me a little bit the history of fire in South Africa? So how was intended fire, and how you apply fire, if you apply fire, and how this is beneficial to the land, and what kind of fires are ruining the landscape?
Yeah. Okay. I choose to not be too smart and too clever and too deeply studied into one specific aspect or component, because I've learned the more you dig into one single aspect of something, the more you lose the bigger picture and the interactions with the rest. So instead of trying to be specialized in a specific component of the savanna ecology, if I can call it that, I'd rather try and track what the landscape tells me through history. What are the interactions between animals and landscape, and soil, landscape, topography, and so there's all these aspects that I try and keep together, and then try and see what's happening over time. And my little window is super small in the bigger picture. But I also try and read as much as I can and listen to accounts from yesteryear Um, Now, one of the dilemmas that we have is that academia in general, well, in the ones I know in the South African context, tend to ignore any historical recording if the author of that account didn't have a PhD. So a lot of what is written down and proven to be very accurately written down verified through other sources, is ignored. So the let's call it the South African context, many years ago, influences mainly the population around here was the Bushmen, or some academia referred to them as the Sand People. Every Bushman that I've dealt with, if I asked him what term do I use to refer to you, I would say Bushman or Bush people, and not Sand. Because it's a Western thing. Somebody thought of it. It's not necessarily what they call themselves. Yes, there's a small community who use that word in conjunction with something else, but so they were pretty much the people occupying for a very long time Southern Africa, long before Bantu or black people. And they moved through, or occurred, and lived in all these landscapes: the high veld, the low veld, the bush veld, the grassland, the fynbos in the Cape. But then later, when the waves of black people moved in, they were squeezed out of the system, and eventually the ones living in the desert, or that moved to the desert, were the ones that survived, because nobody else wanted to be there, I guess. But I'm quite sure there had been Bushmen living there at the same time, long ago. But that's where they remained, small pockets. And yes, there's around settlements today a tendency of them to burn veld. But every time I ask them why, they would say it's so that the veld is already burnt around their homesteads or the village, because they don't want a runaway fire coming their way. But, it was burnt this way, and then another time it was burnt that way, depending on the wind direction. So you ended up with a bit of a mosaic pattern. I'm not too sure how much of deliberate burning was taking place amongst the stock, because the Bantu people brought livestock. And yes, I'm sure they did burn, but we sit today with a belief that if you don't burn the old grass, the rain will not come. So I'm sure they were doing that to a certain extent. But the one part that a lot of people don't understand, and what politicians choose to ignore today, is that the abundance of people in South Africa was a fraction of what it is today. An absolute fraction. Then there were times with absolute genocide. There was a lot of turmoil amongst the Bantu people, known as the Difakani. Okay, so the Difakani or Mfakani, depends on which side of the spectrum you were, the oppressor or the oppressed. They had quite a big impact on population dynamics, and especially here in at least the northeastern side of South Africa. There were large tracts of lands that was void of people at that point in time, late 1700s, early 1800s. So when the first white settlers came up in the 1830s, there was a lot of vacuum of people. Yes, in some places they clashed with the local people, being murdered by the black people. Even it was just a question of asking to traverse the countryside. But then in most cases, there was a please help us against the oppressor attitude. So there was a lot of cooperation. And then not long after that, literally commercial scale, large scale, livestock farming became part of the scene. Certain parts, high veld, and then parts of the low veld was mainly sheep, and then other parts was mainly cattle, and or mixed. And instead of having small pockets of people moving their cattle around, their goats around, burning a patch here, burning a patch there, the white farmers, because of the large numbers of livestock, worked on a different scale. And I guess they just mimicked the movement of the natural wildlife, mass migrations. South Africa had seen massive migrations, annual migrations. Nothing less than what you see today in the Masai Mara and the Serengeti. Mm-hmm. That's just one of the last few remaining. But that happened all over Africa, or in all savanna areas. But what the livestock farmers did was to send the young boys down to the low veld, and in this case the Springbok Flats, not far from here. And they burnt out the whole place every April, in other words, late summer, early autumn, sometimes early winter, depends on the rainfall. And that was so that if they arrive 6 weeks later with the livestock, there's a green flush, a nice grazing lawn available. And as they leave the high veld, they burnt the place behind them. So the high veld was burned down early winter after the frost had come, because the food quality had plummeted. Mm-hmm. The moment the frost comes, the palatability, the protein and energy levels are just gone, because it's gone down into the ground, into the roots. And they burnt everything out here, leaving the whole place void of ground cover for the whole winter. Then a lot of grazing, a lot more animals added to the system in the low veld or in the Springbok Flats. But this every year completely burnout had changed the landscape. And it had changed the landscape drastically. So those are serious impacts that happened 150, 170 years ago. Today we sit with an attitude amongst the communal farmers of the grass is no good, so let's burn it. My cow is getting skinny on this bad grass, so let's burn it. I need green grass. And also a belief system advocated by some religions that you have to burn the whole place down before the rains will come. That's one dilemma that we sit with. At the same time, the dilemma of, in the commercial farmlands or pastures, not the commercial, the communal farmlands, where a person will say, no, but he's a traditional cattle farmer. But a traditional cattle farmer didn't sit on his backside under a tree complaining about his cattle that's getting skinny, or dying because they eat plastic bags. He would have been herding them, or he would have made sure that his sons are herding them to where there is green grass. That is how it was done. But the moment farms have taken away the predators and poison and snares and traps and everything else, the passiveness just crept in, because now I don't need to bring my cattle back to the homestead every night to guard them. And that had a devastating effect on the grazing, because now all the good grass, every time it grows back, it gets eaten, it gets eaten, it gets eaten until it dies. And all that remains is the highly unpalatable grass. Overgrazing is not necessarily too many animals. It's any number of animals in one spot for too long. Because the second bite or the third bite in a short space of time deprives the plant, the grass, of leaves, and there's not enough reserve stored in the root to regrow and regrow and regrow. It needs to regrow hair roots, where the less palatable stuff has got an ability to store more reserves in the roots. So that's taking good grazing into a bad space. Naturally, that never happened, because large numbers of herbivores move through the landscape in a migration, mowing down everything, and then it regrows behind them. But it's no different from the average commercial farmer who's got his farm cut up in pens by fences, and his cattle is chased into a pen for 30 days or 60 days, and they eat until the grass is finished, and then they go to the next one. Exactly the same thing happens, because for cattle, roughly on day 8 or 9 in the summer season, that new growth is long enough for the cow to bite it again. Okay. For sheep, it's even less, it's 3 or 4 days. So if you don't rotate fast through the landscape, you're going to lose all your highly palatable species, and it's going to be replaced by unpalatable stuff. So the quick rotation, 7 days move, 7 days move, 7 days move, is super important. Yes, in winter time when there's no growth in the grass, you can keep them longer because it's not going to damage the vegetation, but you do damage to your cattle, because they now have to eat stuff that is less palatable while next door there's still good grass. Rather rotate them in the same pattern throughout the winter as well, so that they keep on moving through the landscape where there's the best food. Meaning that their condition stays as good as possible, as deep into the winter as possible, before they really, so the short space of time, you're actually just shortening that period when conditions are really tough. And in this environment, which we refer to as Sauerfeld, high altitude, fast cold winter, and then good summer rains with a lot of grass, it's almost only late winter or early spring, depends on when the rain comes, that you're really in a crunch time. Sometimes even early summer if the rain stays away. But that way you keep the conditions of the animal, or the animals, very good as well. So it's rather a case of using livestock to manage the land.
Instead of using fire.
Yeah. So number one, carbon sequestration takes place in savanna, not in forest, in savanna. When above ground the plant is mowed down, then the hair roots need to die to supply energy to grow new roots and components to grow new leaf. Once the leaves are there, then it can photosynthesize again and grow new hair roots. And every time it gets mowed off at the top, The dieback underground is carbon staying in the soil.
Mm-hmm.
Where in forests, you've got composting. And everything goes up into the atmosphere as methane and CO2, the carbon.
Yeah.
The carbon doesn't stay in the soil. That's why the slash and burn policy around the equator, when there's a clear cut, the community comes in, they burn everything, they plant basically on the ash.
Yeah.
And the next season they must move on because that's just pure silica left behind. There's no substance in the soil for plant growth again.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that tropical forests are major climate drivers and super important for the Earth's overall climate is definitely the case.
Mm-hmm.
But we make a mistake if we think that is where carbon sequestration is taking place. There is a huge amount of carbon going up into that. The high nitrogen levels, because of the composting, provides a stress growth in those plants. And that's why there's such an abundance of wildlife or life.
Mm-hmm.
Because all the insects who live and everybody that wants to suck on a tree, on a plant, on a leaf of any kind can do so because the sugars in the plants are so low. Where a healthy plant that grows on humus, not on compost, has got a far higher sugar count and therefore less chance of being sucked on by
More resistant from
let's call it predation by insects.
By insects, yeah.
So for me, the use of fire, if you're a cattle farmer, yes, sometimes you need to get rid of moribund grass, which might be there in this case for us. Still, some of the enclosures are too large and the herds are too small. So the cattle numbers are not winning in those camps. And effectively, reducing the size of the enclosure is extremely costly.
Yeah.
Because of the cost of fencing material. So in some cases, I mow mechanically. In some cases, I have to burn because there's just too many rocks, for instance. I can't use a mower there. And then I will try and wait, not only until the first rains that come, but until the first good growth is there. So in summer, and I wait until nightfall, and I go and light the moribund stuff, which had been standing there for 3, 4, 5 years without being utilized because it's just
unpalatable.
Totally unpalatable. Then I light that, and I allow it to run. But
controlling it.
Yes, but because on the outside of it, outside of that pocket of moribund grass, there's green grass. And by lighting it only after sunset or early evening, there's already dew. So the fire literally consumes the moribund and nothing more. And then, when the cattle come through that camp again, the regrowth on the moribund is good. They eat it, and the moribund grasses in our area is exactly that. Are the plants or the grass species who thrive on underutilization. And by applying fire in this way, you're not exposing the earth to a lot of bad sun without any cover. You're not allowing it to run and consume good grazing as well. And you immediately or quickly after that are utilizing the regrowth through mouth moves, and therefore you're applying brakes on the regrowth of the moribund species, and they start going down in number and volume, and the better quality grasses are coming through. Okay. So it's actually using it just as an improvement. And the consuming of it that time of year through fire is fairly limited. So it's not this massive block burn that consumes everything it's fairly small scale. Is it time consuming? Yes. Is there a very small time in the year that I can do it? Yes. So can I get to everything every year? No, definitely not. But I can do a patch here and a patch there, and every season I try and build on that. For a long time in my mind, if you wanted to burn, you had to do the whole block, the whole camp. Otherwise, the animals are going to only hammer the places that was burned, and not the parts that, in this case, it's actually working in my benefit. Okay. To have it that way, because it's exactly those species that I want to hammer, to make them disappear.
Yeah.
So that I can have good grazing that can be consumed on a 7-day basis and then left to regrow for a good couple of weeks. And in that way, I'm actually harvesting carbon and putting it back in the soil. And if I think of our marsh, which is a fair chunk of the land, a lot of trees are drowned this year, or this last season, where we had, for the first time in 10 years, just above average rain. We had lost nearly 3 years of average rainfall over the last 10 years because of the drought. But we've had a lot more rain 20 years ago. 23 years ago, we had almost double the rain that we had this season. And trees that survived that water now drowned. And it's purely because there's now better grass cover everywhere. So all of a sudden, the marsh is again proper marsh, holding water back, and not just allowing it to run past. So that process it's a slow process. It's time consuming, and you mustn't lose focus. It's easy to just disregard what you're busy with, and then you realize what you're making a mess.
Yeah.
We do sit with big dilemmas today. We almost on an annual basis have catastrophic fires in the district. And that is also, again, the notion of upcoming farmers that my cattle will only look better when it's green grass. So I need to burn it, and the belief system that it's not going to rain if I don't burn it. And then it's an indiscriminate lighting of, I mean, you were here, you experienced it. Fires being lit on days with humidity of 10 and 12%, fire danger index way into the 60s. It's absolutely the worst time to start a fire. And it's almost, I don't care how far it goes, because I've just succeeded in what I wanted to do. And it's other people's problem to stop it. So that's the one end that we sit with. Other end we sit with, it's a mountain. Climatic change is bringing us thunderstorms in strange times of the year. Yeah, we had in August, which was still strictly winter, lightning storm, dry lightning, and we had 2 fires. But if the entire landscape was utilized in the way that I described earlier on, with either wildlife or livestock on a rotation where in summer they're up on the Highveld, up here in the Waterberg, for instance, and then in winter in the Lowveld and the Springbok Flats, the large numbers would have done the trick in reducing the fuel load evenly. Today we don't have that. A lot of farms are not being worked proper. There's this fashion thing about wildlife in cages. Yes, it might be a 5,000 hectare cage, but it's still a cage. So animals are trapped, they can't move, they can't go to the low veld or the Springbok Flats in winter time. They're up here all the time. But because they're up here all the time, your stocking numbers must be according to the winter. So in summer you will never have enough hooves and mouths to work the landscape. Never. You cannot have the species composition that you're supposed to have in bulk grazers. And so everybody sits with too many selective grazers and too few bulk grazers. And it's a mosaic of a total mess. You cannot manage a game farm, period.
Yeah.
That it's not an ecological system that is manageable. So in that case, in this environment, the Sauerveld, you have to do burning to reduce fuel load to prevent catastrophic fires. And in this environment, it's, I try to stay away from a rigid program as far as I can. Because I'd seen the Kruger Park fire policy change I can't remember, I think in about 1995, somewhere around there, 94, 95, maybe 96. It had changed something like 19 times in 40 years. Sometimes it changes while there's a fire going. Because every decision maker is so scared of what he's done that he's not permitting his plan to just play out and see how it goes at the long run. So I'm very far from a rigid program, but it was initially the rigid program that caused a lot of trouble. But as a sort of a thumbsuck on a game farm here in the Sauerveld, you need to work on a rotation of 3. And it depends on what the amount of rainfall is, etc., etc.
What does it mean, rotation of 3?
In 3 years, your whole farm must be burnt.
So every year.
So either you burn 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, then go back 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, or you burn half, skip, half, skip. Because there's an interesting thing with wildlife. The moment there was a burn, everybody will go to the burn. And that year, by the end of the growing season, that burn is only that short.
Yeah.
So if you don't burn next year, this piece is going to be eaten into the ground next season as well. So then you burn the next one. Then everybody goes there and this part gets a bit of chance to recover, but it needs 2 years to recover. So but if you don't do that, you're going to have way too much fuel. So when there is then a runaway fire, times like this, early summer or spring where it's 35, 38, sometimes more, with a 10% or lower humidity and a 30, 40 kilometer per hour wind, a catastrophic fire is going to destroy everything.
Yeah.
And a normal cattle fence, wildlife go through. Cattle, sheep, livestock are stupid, they don't. But wildlife will go through, but the high fences trap them.
Yeah.
And you run the risk of losing animals. But the big thing is the habitat gets messed up. And so that's the one thing. So there's a lot of game farms which is mismanaged with way too big fuel load. Then there's many livestock farms which have been abused over time by overgrazing, meaning animals too long in one spot. So the fuel load is not properly removed. There's a lot of moribund and a lot of invasive woody plants that is highly flammable. And then, the guy stopped farming. And there's many farms that have just stopped farming. So now, year after year after year after year, there's a build-up of fuel. There's wealthy people who bought farms and then they don't do anything because they just want land. And I don't have a problem with that. But the part that they don't understand is they are busy building fire bombs, storms that will literally destroy that land. Because nobody is removing the fuel load. If you don't want a farm, by all means, don't do it, but still manage the land. And then you have to use fire. Because if you manage the fire correctly, the right time of year, you reduce fuel load without causing damage. Where if it's these super hot runaway fires with a very hot head, at a time of the year when the trees, for instance, are just starting to push leaves, the trees literally explode. The sap cooks in the tree and it just bursts and the tree is dead. Where if it's a fire at a different time of year, it runs underneath and it doesn't damage the tree. So you ended up creating more of a firestorm by not doing anything than if you do something regularly. And the crazy part is most of those farms don't have proper fire breaks in place. Cut-off lines where you can actually fight the fire with a backburn or just put it out at night when the temperature is down and the wind had dropped. So we're in a bit of a challenge in that sense. It's catch-22 in the sense that, yes, it's taking resources. And you might have had the money to buy the farm back then. Now you're in a different space financially and you can't necessarily afford what you want to do. But all that happens is it's catching up to everybody in the neighborhood. And you end up with catastrophic fires, even on farms where you do have proper veld management in place through cattle and rotation. Just because you can't stop a fire with a 40 kilometer an hour wind with zero humidity. That's just impossible.
Yeah.
So there's the responsibility that lies on landowners that's often neglected. And it, to a certain degree, it shouldn't be something that's done by choice. Because there's so many people who don't know and who don't understand. But there's so many other things in the country that's equally or more important to deal with. That's just where we are. That's just where we are.
Yeah, and I think it's everywhere in the world, more or less. It's
happening
very similar, similar scenarios.
Yeah.
Very similar.
Yeah. So I remember a number of years back, the Cape, the Fynbos biome, Mediterranean rainfall. So their summer is fire season. January, February, catastrophic fires there. And there's a lot of resources deployed there. Huge. I mean, if we had that, we won't have an issue whatsoever. There's a huge amount of resources. And I struggle to understand why, but it's because there's houses and small little things in between everything. So it's the density of people and infrastructure that dictates that there must be more resources. But we had massive fires here that August, September, October. I might be wrong, it's quite a while back, but I have in my mind that in the Waterberg district about 400,000 hectares were lost in wildfires. And it was all of these, like lightning strike or arson, and it burns for a week, and there's 40,000 or 50,000 gone in one go. Then our working on fire teams were taken down to the Cape in January and February to go and help with those fires. But they had to go through special courses and training and induction courses how to deal with the fynbos, because fynbos fires are so dangerous, because of the fuel load and the sort of flammable oils in the plants and things like that. They just wanted to get on with the job because the place is burning down. And then when they came back, they said, the fynbos it's a picnic. Those guys must come here in October when it's 38 degrees Celsius, zero humidity, and a big wind, in this thatch grass and turpentine grass and what we refer to as bankrupt bush. Stubia vulgaris is the plant. It's an indigenous group of plants, but it's invasive and overutilized. So when soil gets damaged, overgrazed, they thrive. And they've got a lot of paraffins and other flammable stuff in them. It's a crazy fire. Mm-hmm. And these guys that came from here said, no problem. That fire was rough, but it was okay.
Yeah.
So yes, I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it raises more questions. Yeah. There are two main questions. The first one is, you mentioned that game farming is not really helping the landscape, and is not manageable. So to help the landscape, cattle farming is one of the ways to help it. To manage the landscape, so to help to reduce the food load, the fuel load. I remember you mentioned right at the beginning when I arrived, the fact that since you started cattle farming in the area, some species they also came back, just because the grass and the landscape is a better place for different species. So a way would be to put down the fences in an ideal world, yes, and changing the mindset to have wildlife together with cattle. So they can be a combination of mega herbivores together with cattle farming, without the need to lose one or the other.
Yeah.
How do you make sure? And how also tracking is important. For you to understand those mechanisms between wildlife and cattle, not only in understanding cattle behavior, but also to understand landscape and how do you put it together. How tracking is helping you.
Right.
I don't know if
these are now many questions together.
Yeah.
Okay, let me first just talk about. So when we started, there were no common reedbuck here. They used to occur here, and then they vanished from the landscape through poaching. And the old guy that claimed to have been the one that shot the last few common reedbuck in this marsh, he's still alive today. He frowns about neighbors shooting kudu in the citrus orchard, but yet at the same time he's happy to tell you that he had used poison to kill a honey badger that was eating his wife's chickens. The point for me in that is wildlife, if they have a choice, they move to the place that works best for them at that time. With game farming in South Africa, high fences, legislation had allowed, if you've got a game-proof fence, you can own the wildlife on it. You can buy and sell, you can hunt any time of the year, you can do what you want. Yes, obviously there's certain restrictions, but that also allowed, unfortunately, wildlife from other areas in South Africa and even across the borders to be moved into areas where they naturally didn't occur. I take the farm across the road, which is called Hartebeesfontein. Red hartebees didn't occur here, but that's the one that's available at relatively low cost. So they bringing back red hartebeest, thinking that that's the hartebeest. No, it was the bastard hartebeest, which is the tsessebe, which is a scarce animal today. So the price is high. Therefore, nobody's got them. But we ended up with habitat fragmentation because of these high fences. It allowed for a lot more numbers. We've got far more numbers of wildlife today than 100 years back. But it's all messed up. Gene pools are messed up. Animals occur where they're not supposed to be. Like I said earlier, most people have too many selective grazers and way too little bulk grazers. So the bulk grazer that you need on any game farm is either white rhino, which nobody wants today because the security risk is too high, buffalo, which is expensive, and a few other things that you can deal with, but you never have enough. And then you need to rotate them, you need to move them, and you can't move wildlife on a 4,000, 5,000 hectare game farm. But cattle you can. So put up internal fences and move your cattle through that. Or employ a whole bunch of cattle herders to keep them in a solid block moving around. There is one way of making sure that your wildlife moves through the landscape proper, and that is to chase them every single day, because we've also taken the wildlife after the predators away. Then man must become the predator. But nobody wants that because they want the animals to be tamed. And then when they do bring a trophy hunter or a hunter, the animals mustn't be running all over the show. They must be relaxed.
So they can shoot them easily.
So they can shoot them easily. So it's a super difficult and complex thing to manage. Yes, I would love to be in a landscape where every single highway that's not fenced in with enough over and underpasses for wildlife. It must be a total speed zone, speed restriction of 50 kilometers an hour to avoid collisions with wildlife. No game fences allowed, except where you've got crops or orchards that you have to fence in. So the law should be, if you want to have an orchard, you must fence it in so that wildlife can't come in. But that's not going to solve the problem without predators. Because it's only the predator that makes sure that the wildlife is herded. And without herds, all the wildlife is doing exactly the same as what cattle would do if you leave them in an enclosure for 30 days. They're going to eat the sweet grass and eat the sweet grass and eat the sweet grass until it's dead. And then leave. But if they're herded, if they're chased by predators, if they're hunted, then they're in big numbers, big herds. And a big herd has to move through the landscape, and you eat what's in front of you, otherwise you don't get food. So where we are in this world today, I almost want to say it's probably going to be easier in Europe to have a system like that going than here.
Why so?
Just because of the land use here. You're probably in a better space with the bison in Poland or in Romania than what we would be here. Where animals can move. What you need is the wolf to come in to really move them.
Or truckers to run after them,
trackers.
waiting for the wolves to come.
Yeah, so for me in Europe, in Slovakia last year, we worked the woods for 10 days, can't remember, let's say 10 days. And it was small pockets of red deer, 5, 6, 7 together, small pockets, small pockets, small pockets, small pockets, small pockets. The second or third last day, every single one of them of those pockets were all together in one area. Because we'd been harassing them effectively like predators. We'd been stalking them.
Yeah. Without the idea of stalking them.
Without the stalk, without the
you wanted
idea.
to stalk, you didn't want to kill.
Yeah. And naturally, they moved and said, we better be together because then we've got more ears and eyes and we're probably going to pick up the harassment sooner. And that's what you need for wildlife. Without the predator, ungulates are as bad or even worse than a cow. Just because most of them are super selective if left alone in what they eat. So they'll utilize until there's nothing left before they're forced to eat the next thing. So yes, tracking. Well, I guess life is about tracking. And then I'm not talking about taking a footprint and follow it. Tracking the changes in the landscape, tracking the changes in the vegetation, tracking the changes, remembering what happened there. And when you get there again, what does it look like now? Why? So for me, that the mindset of a tracker is super important to what I'm doing here. And then yes, on a physical side, if I don't see the jackal tracks in the pen where my cows are calving, I get concerned because there's something wrong. There's supposed to be jackal tracks in the morning. If I know where the leopard tracks are, I manage my cattle accordingly and I make sure there's no small calves in that area. The brown hyena tracks I see all over the show. And the one I know is the one I know because he's not eating my land like my calves. So that's on a physical way of tracking and seeing the change. I saw the first common reedbuck track here on this portion of the farm 6 months before I heard the reedbuck alarming. 6 months before I saw the first reedbuck. But when I saw them the first time, I thought, are you passing through? No, because I had these 3 incidents over 1 year. But let me just hang on. Then I saw another one and another one. Then I saw a youngster. And then I knew that what I'm doing is at least in the right direction. Because once again, the flay is a better habitat for the reedbuck here than where they came from, which is probably escapees from a game farm, where the landscape, the habitat isn't suitable for them anymore.
Yeah.
So they chose to move. And yes, there's a bit of satisfaction. You know that something is going the right way.
Yeah, and there's the feeling, as I mentioned to you, when I'm going out around the area here to look some tracks, just on the main road, you could feel that what it is real. You have cows, you have horses, but also you have all the wildlife.
Yes.
Aardwolf or porcupine or honey badger, mongooses. Whereas when you enter in a game farm, you feel that what you see is something
plastic.
Yeah, is not real. It's real because the animal is there, but is the landscape with the track is something wrong.
Yeah.
There's something very completely wrong with the landscape. Yeah. I think I have one last question. If you don't want to add anything else, is about the fires and tracking and fires. Prevention, detection, prevention, or prevention, detection, defense, and fighting How tracking is helping you in this sense?
Okay, so fire, yeah, it's two things, but it's the same thing as well again. I think for me, it's a case of constantly being aware of when last did it burn where. So the history again. How did the landscape change since then? So if it's my neighbor, what did he do in the meantime? How long ago did it burn there? After that burn, what was the landscape use? In other words, it gives me an idea of the fuel buildup. Constantly being aware of when, how the wind is changing, when it's going to change. So those are all things that plays a major role for me in making decisions around when and what to do on a fire. So for instance, when the fire was reported on the Saturday afternoon at 2, first thing I did, I was aware of where the wind is blowing, but I confirmed if there's any change in the prediction on the wind direction, because I'd already looked at it that morning when there was the lightning fires. It's because then I can start preempting. But I also know what it looks like on the other side of the fence where the neighbor didn't do any fire breaks. Is my fire break going to help? Where is it? Is it going to get there before the temperature drops? If the temperature drops, we can use it. If not, then we can't. And you were there when that intense fireball came and we had to get out of there quick. But then also just the uncertainty and the constant, where is everybody else? We can't put in a backburn before everybody inside is not out. Where are they? We need to find them. We need to get the message to them to get out before we can put in a backburn. And if we don't put in the backburn quick enough, it's going to run past us. And then another farm, and another farm, and another farm. Already driving that way, the first run to try and see what the fire is doing, I already picked up where the cattle are. So when I got the message to the staff to go and get the cattle out of there, I could tell them where. So those are all things that, so it's about being aware of your surroundings. That's something that you as a tracker need to have constantly.
Analytical mind and just
Yeah. And then also preempting. So it becomes the speculative part of tracking. What if? And then if we can just stick it out long enough, hold it back until the temperature drops, then we can do something else. So it's that constant processing of everything. Is it tiring? It is 10 times worse than tracking a lion.
But tracking a lion or a kudu or a red deer in Slovakia or any other animal can help you to fight fires.
Yes, yeah.
Or to have this analytical mind, this openness and
So the game is, if you panic, you lose it, because A, you do stupid things. B, you're not going to do it in time. And then most important, you're going to put yourself or somebody else in danger.
Same as tracking a lion.
Exactly.
The same.
Exactly.
Or rhino or whatever.
Whatever. So it's the overall awareness of what can we, what can't we, that brings a certain sense of calmness. Because without that calmness, you're not going to win a fire.
Yeah, your mind is not.
Is it super tiring? Yes. Like I said to you, I mean, without being on it for 3 days, we were busy with it for 3 days because of the 2 nights. And then actually starting the night before, because of when the lightning storm came, I immediately went up and scanned the surroundings to see if I see anything. But it drains your energy, and the 3 days lost on that meant that I fell 7 days behind on others.
Yeah.
Effectively, just because you're so
You're
drained.
Yeah.
But yes, tracking is a critical part of being able to deal with these sort of what I guess a lot of people would see as a total catastrophe.
But you can use tracking to make fire breaks.
Absolutely.
Read the landscape and decide where to put the fire breaks, how to divide your camps, to put the cattle in, to reduce fuel load. So it's all process that's going to help.
Yes.
In future decisions.
And at what places is it not only the line you burn out or the road that you clear, it's also the vegetation next to it that you have to mow down. You experience that on the road. Once we ran out of our fire breaks and we got to the neighbor's property, it was a total different experience for you. Flames coming over your head.
And I was thinking in Europe, and I don't know the situation here in South Africa, but we see tracking as something completely for biologists or for people interested in nature. So something which is relegated to nature. Whereas over the years, trying to develop and keeping developing as a tracker, I'm seeing it more as you said, more related to any aspect of life, right? What is the situation here in South Africa? Sorry, and what do you think? Situation in South Africa regarding farmers. Do you do training also with farmers? Are farmers interested to see this aspect, and are they applying somehow tracking to their daily activities, and how many? Let's say, are they willing to?
Okay, I think there's a different angle on that in South Africa, and with in different sort of fields of industry. Obviously, in the ecotourism industry, physical tracking of wildlife is a continuous daily job for a lot of people. A lot of people find that's their sole income. My experience limited in Europe, a little bit more in the United States. Europe far more wildlife orientated people, biologists, things like that. And yes, then a bit more people into education, special education, and things like that. That link with nature. In the US, wildlife biology, boom. Man tracking, boom. And very seldom do they speak to each other. Totally different fields and approaches. And then there's the survival primitive skill crowd, which is doing actually a big job in creating momentum amongst amateur citizen science. But then there's also the other crowd, which I guess is probably, I've heard them referring to themselves as spiritual trackers, which is sometimes similar and sometimes totally different. In our environment, it's the ecotourism industry. And there's a lot of it happening within the lodge industry, the photographic safari type efforts. There's a lot of it happening amongst in the hunting industry as well, which is also part of ecotourism.
Mhm.
But interesting there, no training and no certification, or almost nothing. And it's a simple case of, I'm the professional hunter or the hunting outfitter. If my tracker gets a certificate, he's going to run away from me and join your outfit for 50 Rand more per month. Now, I've gone to the effort of paying for him, and then you sit with a guy with a certificate. That's the one end. The other end is, my guy is better than yours. But if we let them be tested, it might turn out your guy is better than mine. And that's not good for my advertising thing and the ego and things like that. So it's an interesting ball game, that. But then another component to it is man tracking is not search and rescue in South Africa. It's criminal issues. Man tracking is a serious component in anti-poaching, especially with the rhino issues. But then also where there's a lot of farmers getting involved with things like this is just normal crime. Crime on farms, crime in the rural areas. And it can be as trivial as somebody walking through stealing a piece of copper wire to a proper planned farm attack and murder. So within the community policing, there's often people that has got fairly good tracking skills. And some of them are better than others. Unfortunately, everybody thinks they've got good skills. So often a crime scene is totally obliterated by the time the real trackers pitch. Or the police for that matter. But that there are pretty competent trackers amongst them, that's for sure. That's for sure.
Okay.
Not necessarily certified people, but very competent.
Yeah, it doesn't matter to be certified, to be able to act properly in your
there is an interesting component to it, and that is in legislation or in the justice system. If there's not a piece of paper involved that says that you are a tracker, if you testify that you tracked the suspect from the crime scene to where you arrested him,
nobody believes you.
It's thrown out quick. But if you have got a certificate proving that you are a tracker, it's regarded as expert witness.
And how these certificates are given? Is it going through the cyber tracker process?
So there's a bit of cyber tracker certification that had helped in court cases.
Okay.
We've had the senior tracker, who's currently a master tracker, being declared an expert witness based on that. But the proper man tracking stuff, which is done by some of our cyber tracker colleagues, is not a cyber tracker certificate. It's a different certificate.
Okay.
Cyber tracker's focus is animal, wildlife. It's not man tracking. And there's extra components around man tracking that is not part of cyber tracker. There's extra skill sets that's important that's not part of cyber tracker. But I know of a couple of incidents where the court recognized the fact that the person that tracked the criminal was a professional hunter, and he's got a professional hunter's license. And part of his job is to track. So he could validate it. Yeah, that was recognized. But the work that Colin Patrick and Andreas Liebenberg is doing around man tracking, specifically in anti-poaching and conservation, is amazing and very good and well recognized and respected within Africa in the justice system. If the field ranger shows his man tracking certificate from them, the court says, okay, we believe you, speak, you know, we recognize you as a tracker. And that had made a big difference in positive convictions. So yes.
Okay.
What else?
Okay. Well, I think if you want to add something to what we said, but I think, let me see if it's still. Yeah, we're 4 minutes. I mean, we can start it again over, but yeah, I think all the questions I had, you replied, and I didn't need to ask you questions that you put inside. You put already, already inside. Yeah. Yeah, and thank you, Adriaan. Yeah, I really appreciate it. Now we give this video to some colleagues in Sicily for this rewilding fire project, which involves hunters and farmers and rangers as well, which would be interested for them also to listen a little bit different different realities and help us maybe to where to lead to. To help the landscape in Italy, in Sicily, where we are, especially in the past few years with the huge fires and with the climate change and everything, we had a huge loss of fires. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I even want to say it's always easier to see. You've seen. You've been there, you experienced. Not planned, but you experienced. The fire break that we burned, you experienced, and that was planned.
Yeah.
And I knew that we were going to still have to do that, so it was great that you could experience it. And that was good for you to just settle your nerves a little bit around it.
And get ready for the other.
To be in control of a fire. And then that prepared you a little bit for a fire that you're not in control of.
Okay.
I think it would actually be beneficial for people from Europe to understand a bit more about that by experiencing something. Fire, water. When we're in charge, it's good. When we're not in charge, it's a fearsome power.
Yeah.
And to a certain extent, I think it would be good if people can see a little bit of that. I definitely don't offer my services as a guide on that. I think it's something that can be organized and I can play a part in it. But then the dilemma for us is controlled burns and uncontrolled burns are quite often far apart in the year.
Yeah.
Where controlled burns, you can sort of have a time when you're going to do it. And if people are there, you can plan it and things like that. Where when it's a runaway fire, that happens and
you cannot start yourself a fire.
It's never
to have an experience. Yeah.
I remember there was a court case in Kruger Park where the intentional fire ran away and killed 25 people. And because of a lack of skill and a massive void that was left when all the section rangers had been fired, retrenched, and everybody could reapply for their jobs, but there was a quota in place, affirmative action quota. And I can't remember how many years of experience was lost. It was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of experience. People were lost. The fire was burning. They offered their help and they were declined.
They were declined.
And then the fire ran away, and that night it killed 25 people. So then there was a big court case going, and the court didn't understand what is a controlled burn. So now the newly appointed game rangers had to demonstrate what is a controlled burn, and it ran away again. And it was a big one. Nobody got hurt, but it was completely out of control for a couple of days.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing. I shouldn't laugh, but yeah.
No, that's the reality. That's the reality. I'd seen many controlled burns go bad.
Yeah.
We've had a controlled burn down here in the basin at the base of the mountain, next to the ostrich farm, other side of the ostrich farm, where there was already rain, everything was good, and then the landowner booked the working on fire team to come and assist him. But then the climate or the weather just changed. It got dry again. The FDI went up into the red. But because he had booked and the working on fire team said, no, we're here, we're not going to go back now, they lit the fire. And that fire burned a big chunk of land. Over 2 days. 2 days and a night. And it was chaos. It burned a lot more than what it was supposed to. Infrastructure was in major danger. So yes, I've seen many controlled burns going bad.
Going bad, yeah. And it's just a moment.
And that's why I'd rather wait. I'd rather wait. If I want to burn a patch of moribund stuff, it must be green all around. And there will be green leaf inside, but there's enough dry fuel to light. And I do it late afternoon or early evening. The same with burning the fire breaks.
Yeah.
We can do it during the day.
Yeah.
But the risk
is
just a lot higher. Yeah. I wait for the night and I pay the extra overtime and I know we're safe.
Yeah. And I remember to choose the night to burn this one.
Yeah.
You were checking different nights.
Yes.
And you almost spent 1 week before actually doing it.
Yes.
Because the wind should be in a certain position.
Yes.
Temperature, humidity.
Yeah.
Everything should be should be perfect.
Yeah.
And this, I think, it's also your dilemma when to burn the bad stuff.
Yes.
Because sometimes you don't have time, or sometimes the conditions are not there.
Yeah.
And then it's too late.
Yes.
You cannot do it.
Yeah.
So you have to wait
another year.
Yeah.
So yes. Good.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Welcome.